The subject of this chapter is conflict, which obviously could be a negative, but as we'll see, under modern theories of organizational behavior, it could actually be considered a positive in some sense. So we're going to discuss a little bit about conflict, and notice the chapter is not just named conflict, it's conflict and negotiation, which is how you resolve conflicts and actually can turn conflicts into a positive. All a conflict means is a process that begins when one party perceives that another party has negatively affected, or will, or can, or is in the process of negatively affecting something that the first party cares about. It could be something as harmful as that person wants me fired. It could be something as benign as that person wants to do things a little bit differently and that I think would not be best for the company. So conflict could be very, very bad, or it could be kind of benign. It's really not the sort of thing that you can have a definitive, all-encompassing view about. The traditional view of conflict, and the one that probably you think of when you started this chapter, is that conflict is inherently bad, linked to violence, destruction, irrationality, all sorts of bad things. There were political conflicts that we discussed in the last chapter. But there is another view of conflict. The interactionist view is that conflict can actually be encouraged to cause people to be motivated to make changes. Without conflict, you're not really going to have positive changes. You're not going to have people doing things that are going to positively or dramatically change the culture of the company. And sometimes changing the culture of the company or changing the way things are done can actually be a very positive thing. There's functional conflict, which is good, and then there's dysfunctional conflict, which of course is bad. In terms of types of conflicts, you have three basic ways in which conflicts can occur. You've got task conflicts, where people just simply disagree about how to go about doing something. How should we increase sales? Should we advertise on Google, or should we put ads in the newspapers, or should we go to trade fairs, or should we rely exclusively on word of mouth and not spend any money on advertising? These are all policy issues that people can certainly have conflicts over, not necessarily bad conflicts, but disagreements. And disagreement, a certain amount of disagreement, can actually be healthy for a company. There's relationship conflict, which is the obviously a little bit more harmful, a little bit more invidious, where people just don't get along with each other and have trouble working with each other. And then there's process conflict. I mean, I guess that's similar to the way I described task conflict. Task conflict is almost, okay, what are we doing? Process conflict is, how should we do it? For example, a task conflict should be whether we should advertise. But once we decide to advertise, so then a process conflict is, okay, how do we advertise? Uh, this chart kind of indicates how these conflicts could be considered good or bad. The idea is that when you're talking about a task conflict, when you're talking about a conflict of, what to do or a particular goal for a company, some conflict is actually good. You want people to have different creative ideas, bring a diversity of views to this idea of how to do something, or what to do for a company. High level of conflict is never good because you never want people fighting with each other. Relationship conflict is always bad because it never helps when two people don't get along with each other. You may have to deal with it. There may be no other choice, but it's certainly never the ideal. And when you're talking about process conflict, in other words, how to do something, you want a little disagreement, but you don't want a lot of disagreement. You don't need that much creativity and that much change and rocking the boat when you're talking about things like how to go about doing something. Now let's take a look at some of the fundamentals of conflict and how to deal with them. The didactic conflict, or dyadic conflict, excuse me, it means a conflict simply between two people. Intragroup conflict is within a team, and intergroup means between two teams within the same organization, of course. Now, there's not inherently a series of different ways to deal with each of these, although obviously they do have different features. The conflict process, and really this is not necessarily the conflict process, but the uh, series of steps ideally in dealing with conflicts. First of all, you're talking about potential opposition. That's the first stage. In other words, the idea that you can that the conflict arises in the first place because people have differences of opinion, people have differences of personalities. Then people think about it and personalize it. You can have a perceived conflict, which means that people just think that they have a disagreement. They might actually have a disagreement. There's a felt conflict wherein people actually feel the ramifications of that conflict. Something doesn't happen like it should, or something, people have something, have the company react in a way that they disagree with. Then you have the actual response to the conflict, the intentions. In other words, what should we do about it? Should we compete? In other words, you can have two. Again, these are things that are not necessarily done consciously. They could be done consciously, or they could just happen within the structure of an organization. So you can have just the two groups that disagree do things their own way, and they're competing with each other. You could have two different sales forces work differently, and you see which one does better. You could have collaborating. They try to work together to resolve their conflict. They could compromise. They could avoid the whole issue, and they could accommodate each other. And then you have where the people actually, this is kind of the idea stage. Okay, what are we going to do about the conflict, or what's going to happen about the conflict? This is all true whether it's actually discussed or whether it's actually ignored. One of these things are going to happen, or multiple of these things are going to happen. Then you look, and then you have the behavior in which they actually go ahead and enact one of these things. They just ignore the conflict or they settle the conflict. And then you can either have increased group performance, which is what you want because you have the diversity of opinions and diversity of views and different people trying different things, and get a bigger sample size in terms of you could have three different teams trying three different actions and see which one works out best. Or you could have decreased performance, which comes from politics and situations in which people don't behave properly because of this conflict. So let's take a look at these stages in a little bit more detail. First of all, you've got the potential opposition. This is the very beginning of the conflict. There are communication problems. That's what very often leads to conflicts. People don't communicate properly. Structural issues also cause potential opposition and potential conflict. The group is diverse. The bigger the group, the more likely you are to have conflict among it. If you have two or three people, they can work out things a lot more easily. And there are also organizational rewards, goals, group dependency. For example, if the number one sales group gets a vacation, well, then there are three or four sales groups. They tend to conflict with each other. That could be a good thing. Again, that conflict is not inherently always a bad thing, but that certainly is by its nature causes conflict. And there can be personal variables, that causes that middle kind of conflict, that conflict that we discussed before, the relationship conflict, where you have personality variations. People just don't get along because of personalities, or people think differently because of their personalities, or because of emotional responses to each other. The second stage is cognition and personalization. Remember, cognition, which we discussed a little bit earlier in the course and in other contexts, means thinking about something, and personalization, bringing it down to the personal level of the individual. Of course, parties make sense of conflict by defining it and its potential solutions. People who are involved in the conflict usually think it's for a good reason. It could be a positive reason. Okay, we disagree, and therefore we're each going to try it and see which one works best. Or it could be negative, where people think, well, I have to get my way because if I don't get my way, the company's going to go under. Something like that. Of course, there are emotions that come at play also. So perceived conflict is where people are aware of a conflict, and it's kind of more cerebral conflict, whereas a felt conflict is something that is defined by people's being nervous or upset or anxious or frustrated, even hostile regarding a personalization. Then you have the conflict stage. Remember the intention stage. This is where the reaction is happening. Now, the reaction, as we discussed before, could be conscious, it could be decided, it could be negotiated, it could be discussed, or it could just be nothing could happen and the reaction just happens individually. If I think differently than somebody, if I think that we should advertise on Google and the other person thinks that we shouldn't advertise on Google, the other person thinks we should advertise on Yahoo, so one of us could force our view and the other one could be upset about it, or we could advertise separately if we're different components of the company, and that would be obviously not an ideal solution, but it's the sort of thing that might happen when you're talking about an intention. In other words, somebody has to make a decision, or or there has to be no decision about what to do with the conflict. They could compete with each other, they can collaborate with each other, they could avoid the whole issue entirely, which means basically each person goes their own separate way. They could accommodate with each other, or they could compromise. Here's a kind of a little chart in terms of assertiveness, which assertiveness is how strong is each person in digging into his or her viewpoint. And then there's the cooperative axis. If neither party's assertive and neither party's cooperative, so you just avoid the whole issue, and that's that. And the whole thing just doesn't. I mean, it could become an issue because people are doing different things. So this is not the ideal solution, but it could happen where it just isn't discussed. Just both parties just do what they want. If the parties are assertive and not cooperative, they compete with each other. If they're not so assertive but they're cooperative, then one could accommodate the other because one isn't so assertive, one isn't so worried about having things done his or her way, so you just accommodate the other one. If both parties are assertive, and both parties insist that their way is right, and they're cooperative, well, then they can collaborate. In other words, they can work together, kind of increasing each one of them bringing their own ideas to the table. Then in the middle, which kind of encapsulates everything, is they could compromise, and that's something really that could apply regardless of which way you're actually going. Then you have the fourth stage, which is the behavior stage. For all the way down from no conflict all the way to annihilatory conflict, which sounds pretty Armageddon-esque, where there are overt efforts to destroy the other party. I guess that's the worst that could come of a conflict. Whereas the best thing, no conflict, you could have minor disagreements, and as you go further up, obviously, you get more and more destructive to the point of aggressive physical attacks, and then efforts to destroy the other party. Obviously, you really don't want to get to this stage. And then at the end of the conflict, you've got the outcomes. And as we discussed way back about 10, 15 minutes ago, you could have functional outcomes from a conflict, and you could have dysfunctional outcomes. Functional outcomes from competition and from the diversity of ideas improves decision quality because now there are more people asserting their opinions, making the decision, stimulating creativity again because more people are thinking about what the best strategy is, encourages interest and curiosity. Again, that's another thing. If people realize that conflict could be a positive, if people realize they're not going to be punished necessarily for having a conflict within an organization, they're going to bring their ideas to the table more. Problems are aired, acceptance of change, and even self-evaluation where people maybe realize that somebody else had a better idea than them, and that could actually help improve their thought process. Dysfunctional possible outcomes include the group is less effective, less cohesiveness, more destruction of the group. And again, it's not like you have necessarily only one of these. You could have multiple of these outcomes, or even all of these outcomes. And you, as a manager, and working on your organization's behavior, obviously want to try to increase the probability of these functional outcomes and decrease any possibility of the dysfunctional outcomes. So now we move to the section on actually managing conflicts. We're going to have conflicts, so some of them could be good, some of them could be bad, but the question is, okay, what do we do about those conflicts? First of all, we've got just the general warning that we've discussed basically in every chapter, and that is the idea that conflicts have different ramifications in different cultures. When some cultures assume that the supervisor should always be respected and the supervisor should always be followed, and there shouldn't be any conflicts. Whereas, some cultures that are a little bit less individualistic, cultures that are a little bit less collectivist, cultures that are more individualistic have a little bit more tolerance for conflict. And one thing you can do in terms to settle conflicts in general is the idea of negotiation. Now, I come from a law background, so I've studied a lot of alternative dispute resolution, and negotiation is certainly a big component of that. And so negotiation in general is the process by which people try to allocate whatever resources they're looking for. Now, those resources could be money, of course, when you're talking about raises. They could be company resources when you're talking about advertising budgets or budgets within an organization. Resources could be the time given by a supervisor or the time given by a subordinate. Who gets to use this particular secretary in the organization is also something that could be, the basis for a conflict. Okay, so there are two basic types of negotiation strategies, really two basic types of negotiations. There's distributive and integrative. Now, integrative is better, but sometimes is impossible. Sometimes by nature it's distributive. Distributive means there is X amount of resource and it has to be divided. There's $10,000 to be divided, and somebody's got to get, three groups are vying for it, and whatever one group gets, the other is not going to get any. If one group gets all 10,000, nothing left for anybody else. That's the idea of the distributive bargaining. Basically, the goal is to get as much of the pie as possible. It is win-lose. One has to win, one has to lose. Now you can compromise, and each get $3,333.33, leaving a penny left over for the other, for whatever. Anyway, but the point is that each person, but that's still a win-lose scenario. We won a third of it, and we lost the other two-thirds. That may be fair, but it's still distributive bargaining. There's not going to be that much information sharing, and the relationship is not going to be long term because of the fact that you're really trying to defeat the other side. The other side, even though they're within your company, it's really that party is really an adversary. Then there's the idea of integrative bargaining, which should theoretically be used whenever possible, and that's to try to expand the pie. In other words, if we share information with the other side, if we combine our talents and combine our ideas, maybe we can make the pie bigger. There's $10,000, but maybe if we all strategize on how to increase revenue for the company, maybe that 10,000 will turn into 20,000. Sometimes it's impossible to get to that point. Sometimes there literally is only X amount of resource, and that resource is not going to increase, in which case you're going to have a distributive bargaining mechanism. But where possible, obviously, it's better to have this integrated strategy where there's each side, everybody can win, at least to some extent. The distributive bargaining is, this is true, like when you're talking about a lawyer dealing with a settlement case. Somebody's suing an insurance company, and this person's asking for $100,000. It's completely distributive. Every penny that the person makes, the insurance company loses. There is no, there is no two ways about it. You have Party A. You have Party A wants $500,000. You have what Party B wants, to give nothing, and then somewhere in the middle you have some kind of a settlement range. Whereas Parties A is willing to accept at the beginning, 200,000, and Party B is willing to give 150, and hopefully you kind of shrink that and shrink that and shrink that into the point where you actually have a settlement. Then you have integrative bargaining, where a win-win solution is possible as long as both parties are open with their concerns and they're candid. Both parties should be sensitive regard to each other's needs, flexible, etc. If you're talking about a legal example, for example, maybe the idea is the legal fee. The attorney can say, okay, I want 30% of the cut, and the client says, I want to give you 20% of the cut. But the attorney says, if we work together, we can increase the pie and we can get a higher settlement. And if we get a higher settlement, then there's more for both of us. If you're talking about a company, again, here you're talking about sales. If the parties can work together and increase sales, well, then maybe there's a bigger budget that we can split. Then there's the negotiating process. Then a negotiating process is similar to some of the other processes that we've seen in previous sections, which is the idea, okay, what do you do about the negotiation? There's the preparation and planning phase, which is the idea that you're going to have a negotiation, acknowledging that there is a conflict and what you're going to do about it. Defining the ground rules of the negotiation. What's going to happen here? Is there going to be a representative from each side? Are we going to meet in person? Are we going to have an email chain? Are we going to have a message board? What are we going to do to enhance or make possible this negotiation process? Clarification and justification of each party's just rationalization, each party's justification for their position. One of the ways in which you can help the negotiation is to convince the other party that you're right, or that at least you have a good argument. If the other party is convinced you're completely wrong, they might capitulate anyway in the interest of peace or because you have more power, but it's not going to be as easy. Bargaining and problem solving, of course, that's the main step. That's the step where the negotiating process actually comes into its own and gives you a benefit. And then closure and actual implementation of what was decided. And then you have to look at the individuals that you're working with in terms of effectiveness for negotiation. You have to look at personality um, in terms of negotiation. There's little evidence to support that it matters that much, so it really may not matter that much in terms of negotiation. Disagreeable introverts might be best in terms of negotiation because you're kind of more likely to, to get your way, to hold fast. That may be not be the best for compromise, but it may be the best way to get what you want. For an extrovert who is agreeable may give in more, whereas a disagreeable introvert will kind of be the hardest for the other person to convince. You have to look at um, moods and emotions of people. Showing anger might help in distributive negotiations because the other side gets kind of nervous about you and scared of what you might do. But when you're talking about win-win situations, you want to try to be as positive. Now, again, when this says anger, this doesn't mean literal anger, like yelling at people. That I think is pretty silly, regardless. This means strength of your conviction, strength of what you think is proper. I mean, personally, I would tell you to never show anger in any circumstance because I don't think it helps. I think it just makes the other person think that you don't have control over yourself and are a fool. That's my personal philosophy that you never show anger. And culture, of course, as we discussed before, and also gender differences are have to be taken into account. There are ideas that men have a little bit of an easier time negotiation based on personality, based on compartmentalizing things more in terms of logic than in terms of emotion. And just summarizing the chapter, as we usually do, conflict is inherently part of life in any organization, especially a large organization. It's not necessarily bad, although it could be bad. Task conflict is the most constructive type of. Remember, we had three different types. There was task conflict, there was process conflict, and there was personality. Personality was the worst. Doesn't really help at all to have personalities that don't get along with each other. Um, Process conflict could help to establish a better way to do things, but the best thing is conflict in terms of figuring out what to do. Even then, you don't want it to get too heated, but at least that increases the creativity of the various people. And most effective negotiators use both bargaining that is win-win, integrative bargaining, and bargaining that is distributive, where one party's going to win just because of the fact that that might be necessary in some cases.